A whole woke world, a new pronoun I never knew. We'll put it in their shows, they'll never know. Please just let us raise your kids for you. Disney, coming to a television for your child near you. Reimagine tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. We're just not imaginative enough, is what Disney is telling us. Guys, welcome to Unapologetic Live with Amala. We're happy to be with you. It is Tuesday. Taylor's here as well. What's up, Taylor?
What's up, guys?
We're happy to be here. Today we're going to be talking about Disney. I told you yesterday I wanted to do a deep dive into this company and talk about it. Of course, we rewrote A Whole New World because we're out with that. Really, Aladdin, if you ask me, is a culturally insensitive movie and it should not be shown to kids. At least that's what Disney would tell you. And we're going to find that later on in the show and talk about Disney, not just through the lens that we're seeing it now. A lot of people are having discussions about Disney because of the LGBTQ plus agenda that they've now recently been exposed for by our homeboy Chris Rufo. And we're going to talk about that and the stuff that he sort of found in some of their executive meetings in their Reimagine Tomorrow. Because, you know, the present is not good enough. Tradition is not good enough. We need to be new. Now, of course, I'm going to come at this from hopefully a bird's eye perspective. I really want to identify truly, is Disney indoctrinating children? Are they actively doing it now? Is it a plan for later? And before we get into sort of everything that we're going to talk about today, let's talk about the different views on this. Now, there's a sect of our society that believes that we should be teaching children about things like race, about feminism, about sexuality and gender, and that we should do it from a young age so that we don't raise children that are going to be discriminatory or who are ill-educated on these matters because they're going to see it in the real world. That's the argument that we hear. They're going to see this in the real world. Why not educate them about these issues as young as we possibly can? Okay, I see that from a gender perspective. I can see how maybe one would think that. The same thing with race. We say that young kids are going to run into these problems. It's going to be things that they have to face. We should teach it as young as possible, and why not do that with things like Disney movies because they are so present in child's lives? And why not teach young girls about feminism and being anti-patriarchal and all these fun things that come along with these sort of woke narratives? So that's what one side typically believes. We then have the centrists who say, you know, I don't mind if we have a character that represents being a part of the LGBTQ community, or we talk about how men and women can do the same things and achieve the same things, and maybe we talk about how people can be racist, but that's not, you know, that's not the norm in this country. And we can discuss that in films and in children's programming because children are going to see it and they're going to want to talk about it. So why not do that? And then we have the perspective of people that say that's not something that's in the scope of these media companies. Entertainment companies should not worry about that. They should just focus on entertaining. Let parents teach values. I tend to be in that camp of things. I imagine Taylor tends to be in that camp as well. Yeah, and I imagine most of you watching the show are in that camp. Although if you're not, put that down below. Do you think that companies like Disney and other children content creators should be talking about these things because children are going to see it and eventually have questions? Or is that the parents' job? So my blinders on this subject matter are obviously that, or my biases on this subject matter are obviously that I view myself as being indoctrinated from a young age, and I would never want to see that happen to another child. I do believe it is within the parental scope of practice that parents teach kids values and what they believe. And of course, arm your child with the ability to think critically and to come to their own conclusion. I, for one, am not going to be the person who teaches my child, you have to be this, you have to be that. I will just simply give them what I know, what I think, and make them equipped enough with critical thinking skills to come to their own conclusion. And if that conclusion deviates from mine, that's a discussion that we will have, and I will be more than happy to have that. But what I think is particularly interesting with Disney and what this whole controversy has pointed out is how much of a stronghold Disney has on the American childhood. And maybe it was just something that I never noticed or focused on, but I think we as Americans, and maybe people in other countries who are watching this show and who view this content can speak to this as well, Disney is such a firm and foundational a corporation to much of our childhoods, which is something I never thought I would be saying, or I don't think something that should be said. We view people who haven't heard of Disney or maybe whose parents didn't allow them to watch it, and we go, you didn't have a childhood. I can't even think of how many times I've heard that in regard to things like Disney and specific parts of the, quote, American childhood that people don't get to experience. You didn't have a childhood. So I wanted to check in with you guys and see what part Disney plays in your lifestyle. When I was a kid, Disney was a massive part of growing up for me. I was watching a lot of TV. I watched all the Disney movies. I wanted to be Mulan when I grew up. After watching that movie, I thought, she's so fantastic. That's who I want to be. That came out in 1998. I wasn't born until 2 years later. But when I saw Mulan, I thought, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I want to be her. And I remember Disney Channel being a massive part of my upbringing. High School Musical, Raven-Symoné. I would wait for the Disney Channel original movies and say, I can't eat dinner at 6:30. A Disney Channel original movie is coming out. And it was so much a part of who I was. Taylor, did you have that experience as a child?
I mean, yeah, I was more of a 90s kid, so my childhood was when The Lion King and Aladdin and all the classics, even Mulan, came out. So yeah, everyone is talking about them. I remember at McDonald's, they'd have like the little Happy Meals where you get the Disney toy with the Happy Meal, and all that's just, it was just part of growing up. And then the Disney Channel original movies, even Stevens was kind of my era. But yeah, I mean, all that is just like an integral part of childhood, and didn't really think much of it other than, Disney's just part of life. It's part of being a kid in America, that you're just familiar with it. Everyone wants to go to Disney World. We had the fortune of going a couple of times when I was a kid, and it was awesome. Yeah,
it's sort of like that. I think, therefore I am. Disney was just there, and that was it, and that was our childhood, and that's what we accepted because we're children. We don't have really a say in what corporations are a part of our childhood. Now, I polled you guys, and we're putting polls in the chat down below on the Amala Epinobi channel. So if you're watching from PragerU right now, you can head over to the Amala Epinobi Unapologetic channel. It'll be in the description. We'll try to drop it in the chat, and we're polling you guys on this as well because I want to see how big of a part Disney played in your childhood as well. So I asked this on Instagram at the Amala Epinobi if you guys want to follow me and contribute to the show as we do episodes like this. I asked, was Disney a big part of your childhood? Of course, that's a subjective statement. What does big mean? But you can get a feel for it, meaning that when you look back at childhood, Disney plays a role there, and it's a portion of your childhood that you remember more so than others. 77% of people said yes, and we had about 2,000 to 2,500 people respond to this. 23% said no. So that's a vast majority of people who had Disney play a massive part in their childhood. You guys in the chat are at 76%, 24% no. Think about that outside of what Disney is, because a lot of people will hear that and go, well, of course, it's a kids entertainment company. They talk about love and magic. It's a big part of people's childhood. But let's just put a blank there and say, was blank corporation a big part of your childhood? And to have 77% of people say yes is a really interesting thing, and you can interpret that as you will. The next question that I asked was, would you be surprised to meet somebody who hasn't seen Disney content? 81% of people said yes, 19% of people said no. Imagine that, again, through looking at it as a corporation. 81% of people would be surprised or shocked to hear from somebody that has not seen Disney content. And that's where that phrase, well, you didn't have a childhood, comes from. And that would have been something that I would have said to somebody as well back in the day. Now that I view it from an adult perspective, I'm like, okay, that's a little weird, but I would have totally said that.
Yeah, you don't want to be that one kid who's never heard of Disney or seen the Disney movies.
Right.
No offense.
Right.
By the way, if you could reconnect your laptop, I can't get your screen right now.
Oh, okay. Let's reconnect that so you guys can see this polling data for us. Okay. Are we up?
Yes.
Okay, so next. Did you want to be a Disney character as a child? As I said before, I wanted to be Mulan. I saw that movie and I was like, this is the best thing ever. 56% of people said yes. 44% of people said no. Again, that's a majority, and we'll look and see if you guys said that in the chat as well. To the surprised by meeting somebody who hasn't seen Disney, 87% of you said you'd be surprised, and 13% of you said you would not be. Again, look at the stronghold that Disney has on the American childhood. Next, This is something that I learned today, but seemingly something that you guys all knew. Did you know that Disney owns other entertainment companies? Now, this includes Lucasfilms, which is popularized the Star Wars franchise, and Marvel movies, which you are all, I'm sure, familiar with the Marvel universe. 87% of you knew that, 13% of you didn't. I was in that 13% camp. I did not realize that Disney had its hand in so many other hats. Now, stepping outside of just other entertainment companies, did you know that Disney owns other networks? ESPN, ABC, including their news network, FX, which is another cable company that gives entertainment. 81% of you knew that. Again, I was in the camp of the 19% others who did not know that. So not only does Disney play a hand in carving out entertainment for not only children, but young adults and adults in their different franchises and companies, but they also play a massive part in catering what you hear in your news, what you see on ESPN, which we all know ESPN to be a massively woke company, taking a moment of silence for the Florida Don't Say Gay bill and for their LGBTQ plus allies and advocates and members and their Black Lives Matter protests that they did in the wake of George Floyd when all of that was happening. So Disney also owns that corporation. Now, we asked 3 more questions. Would you let your child watch early Disney content? And what I mean by that is early 2000s and prior to that. So the beginning of Disney all the way to the early 2000s. 80% of you said yes, 20% of you said no. I'd be curious to see why that 20% said no. And I asked, would you let your child watch new Disney content? 23% of you said yes, 77% of you said no, and I have a feeling the answer to this poll is very much tuned into the news cycle around Disney right now, which we are going to get into. And lastly, with all of this in mind, do you support Disney financially? Whether by buying a Disney Plus subscription, buying Disney products, attending any of the Disney theme parks, going on Disney cruises, 36% of you said yes, and 64% of you said no. And again, I'll be interested to see how much of that 64% has really changed and grown in the wake of the news that is coming out about Disney right now. And like I said, Disney owns a lot of companies, a lot of other corporations, and a lot of media outlets. You guys can look this up if you want to. It's on TitleMax.com. Here's this image. The companies Disney owns. Now, over here in this loop of the Mickey Mouse hair and hats, you see Marvel Studios, so the entire Marvel franchise. If we move over to here, you can see Fox Entertainment Group. Disney owns Fox Entertainment Group. They own FX. They own Fox Sports. They own this group called the Endemol Shine Group, which is actually international from the U.S. I believe it operates in the U.K. and maybe the Netherlands as well. They also own National Geographic and Hulu. These are all massive companies that now fall under the umbrella of Disney and what their corporation believes and what they feel like is conducive to a good society, or what people should be taught and what people should be talking about. Lastly here, Disney owns all of the Walt Disney groups. Of course, that includes the cruise lines, the hotels, the theme parks, Disney Television. They own ESPN. They own a lot of direct-to-consumer content lines, both here in the United States and internationally. And they also own the History Channel. That should sound very concerning, and I think it will become more concerning as we go through the agenda here with Disney. They own the History Channel. I'm personally a big fan of the History Channel. My grandfather's a massive fan of the History Channel. I wonder how he's going to feel now that he knows that Disney owns it and he sees what they're up to. So why are we talking about Disney as a company today? Well, Florida put out this, what they call Don't Say Gay bill. Of course, that's not the name of the bill. It's the Parental Rights and Education bill. And the left has gone crazy over it, saying, how dare you not teach young children about sexual education, which is essentially what it says. We just don't want to teach young kids about sexual education. It's not a conversation they need to be having. And if it is, that should be something that parents decide, not your educators. Disney was not happy about this. A lot of their employees came out and said, we need to take a stance on this. There were strikes and protests planned at the Disney headquarters where employees walked out during the workday and said Disney needs to take a stance on these issues. Now, let's get into the stance that Disney has taken. Disney had a meeting called Reimagine Tomorrow. And it was basically a corporate meeting of most of their executives and some of their employees who represent the LGBTQIA plus community coming together to talk about how we can have these discussions in Disney content, at the Disney headquarters, during company meetings, and how they can move forward as a corporation to promote LGBTQIA plus whatever denominations and people who identify that way. Now, here is Disney's corporate president, Carrie Burke, during that meeting and what she had to say. This has all been exposed by Chris Rufo, by the way. Shout out to Chris Rufo.
I'm here as a mother of two queer children, actually.
We're not seeing it on the screen. We're just hearing her.
Transgender.
Okay.
We made it 24 hours without technical difficulties and
Now
halfway
here we
through
are.
the first show. Here we go. Let's see if we got it.
Let's see if we can get her up so you can actually see this woman say
There
the
we go.
things that she's saying. Here we go.
Child, and one pansexual child, and also as a leader. And that was the thing that really got me, because I have heard so much from so many of my colleagues over the course of the last couple of weeks, in open forums and through emails and phone conversations. And I feel a responsibility to speak, not just for myself, but for them, to all of us. We had an open forum last week at 20th where, again, the home of really incredible, groundbreaking LGBTQIA stories over the years, where one of our execs stood up and said, we only have a handful of queer leads in our content. And I went, what? That can't be true. And I realized, it actually is true. We have many, many, many LGBTQIA characters in our stories, and yet we don't have enough leads and narratives in which gay characters just get to be characters, and not have to be about gay stories. And so that's been very eye-opening for me. And I can tell you, it's something that I feel perhaps had this moment not happened, I as a leader and me as my colleagues would not have focused on. And going forward, I certainly will be more so.
So going forward, we certainly will be more so, because a lot of people, they throw out the criticism, well, Disney isn't doing this right now. And we'll talk about whether or not Disney is doing this right now later in the show. But this goes to show you what the plans are for Disney. They're going to start to incorporate more LGBTQ whatever type of characters in these films. Now, why is that a problem? Now, personally, I don't care, and this is something for me, I don't care if you have gay characters in a show or lesbian characters in a show. When we start to delve out of that and talk about transgender characters, especially with children's content, I do begin to have a problem. And they are making it very clear that as a corporation, they do not care what you feel as consumers. Let's remember that the vast majority of people who patronize Disney and their shows and their subscriptions are parents, and parents who are not okay with their children teaching this. And I don't care if you're on the left or the right, most parents are not okay with their child being made cognizant of sexual relationships and getting that education from an entity that is anything different than them. So they don't care. They've heard from a fringe amount of activists, whether that be within the company or outside the company, who are outraged by this Florida bill that has nothing to do with Disney. And they are saying, okay, instead of playing to our market, instead of going for the people who fund the things that we do, I'm going to listen to this fringe, small, but very loud minority of people who want us to cave into this woke ideology. And much of this video, if you go and watch these executive meetings, is just fanfare and theater. They know the heat that they're getting from this small minority, and they put out these videos to go, look, I promise we're having these conversations. I promise we're doing something about it, which is typical for corporations in America these days. You see this during the George Floyd riots, when that all sparked. Corporation after corporation started putting out these woke ads, let's make something up. Ford makes vehicles in all colors, and we don't care. We don't discriminate. Things like that. And that's what they do. They pander to whatever the conversation of the time is, and that conversation happens to be gender. My issue that goes beyond the pandering is when it starts to become children's content and you start to indoctrinate children. And that is going to be happening at Disney if it is not happening already. Here's another clip from Reimagine Tomorrow with Disney, where we have a Disney production coordinator, Alan March, talking about the massive influence that Disney has as a corporation, as well as the influence of other media outlets.
All this content's going to kids who don't know any of this, and even if they're in a household like Keith that have supportive parents, they're still getting all of this information from media of what is normal, and there's a lot of power to that, and it just needs to be acknowledged.
There's a lot of power to that, and it needs to be acknowledged. And also, we're having this whole meeting among all of our executives, including Disney's president, where we talk about how we're going to move forward as this massive entertainment conglomerate and what we are going to do with our content. But we need to acknowledge the influence that we have. And he makes the point to say, even with supportive parents, which means, let's talk about the underlying message there, is that Disney is trying to target children who don't have supportive parents, whose parents are going, no, I don't agree with these values. And I know maybe you heard this in school when you had your talk about gender theory, or you filled out your genderbread man, which is something that is happening in children's education. We want those kids. And that is so often the conversation when we have these discussions, is that there is, again, a small vocal minority of people who go, if your parents don't agree with what you're doing, or have a different view of what you're doing, or think this is not right for you, they're not your parents. We're your new parents. Let us raise your kids. Let us instill these values in them, but let's keep it quiet. Because if we tell the parents that this is happening, they won't buy the subscription. They won't let kids watch it. And we'll talk about this new film that they put out called Turning Red, and another film they're putting out called Better Nathan Never, something like that?
Yeah, Better
Nathan Never, which has these sort of themes tied into them for children. And a lot of parents went, okay, Disney put on a new film. I'm going to play it with my kids. We're going to put it on at these sleepovers. And they have no idea the subliminal and completely overt messaging that are in these films. Now, lastly, from this Reimagine meeting, we heard from the CEO of Disney, Bob Chapek, in this sort of groveling, gun to the head apology for why Disney has stood back as a corporation and not said gay. And we have not put LGBTQIA plus people, which represent a very small sect of our society that is growing exponentially because of this sort of media and this sort of dogma. He grovels and apologizes. Now, before we watch this, just think in your brain, is this sincere? Is this sincere?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day for this very important session. By now, I hope you've all read my most recent note, in which I pledged to be a better ally for the LGBTQ plus community, apologize for not being the ally that you needed me to be, and committed to ensuring that our company lives up to its values. I meant every word, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I know that we've got work to do, and that work starts with listening. I'm glad the company will hear from today's panel of LGBTQ plus employees, and
we don't want to hear from those straight ones. Goodness, just the gay ones, guys. Please bring me the LGBTQ plus ones, and all you straighties, you just stay home and listen.
I hope that you are as impacted as I've been by the voices that I've heard over the past few weeks. I've read many emails that have been sent, spoken with LGBTQ plus employees and their allies, met with advocacy groups, and convened my own leadership team. And I have been taken by the honesty, the openness, and the urgency of their stories. I want you to know that your words have made a real impact on me.
He's like, I want you to know that your words have made a real impact on me. I myself am gay. I didn't know that until you told me, but I'm here to tell you today.
I understand that we've made mistakes and the pain that those mistakes have caused. And I know that our silence wasn't just about the bill in Florida, but about every time an individual or institution that should have stood up for this community did not. I and the leadership team are determined to use this moment as a catalyst for more meaningful and lasting change. We've heard many suggestions on how to do that, and we are working to move quickly. I want to thank the LGBTQIA+ Advisory Council.
Okay, we don't need to listen to any more. I want to focus on something important that he just said. We want to use this moment as a catalyst for how we move forward as a company. Obviously, I just paraphrased what he said. But this is what happens, and this is why it is very important that you don't cave to a fringed group of very vocal people who tell you that you have to do something, or you are evil, or you are hate-filled, or you are bigoted and discriminatory, because it functions as a catalyst for how you lead your life moving forward. And maybe Disney is not involved in indoctrination as it stands today. I don't remember being indoctrinated by Disney as a kid. You can look up those old, deep dives that people do about subliminal messaging in Disney movies, like sexual undertones, and maybe that is true, and maybe that was just of a bunch of adult animators working on kids content day in and day out and going, I'm gonna hide a little sex joke in there for the parents who catch it. I do think that has happened in Disney in the past, but it was never this overt political messaging to children about how they should feel, about rebelling against parents. But this is a catalyst. When the people get mad at us and they scream, we bow down to them and we go, it will never happen again. And in fact, can you please write a list of demands for what you would like to see from our company moving forward? And we would make sure that that is met for you. That is what the CEOs are saying. That's what these executives are saying. And that's what these product managers are saying. And now we have a movie coming out made by Disney called Better Nate Than Ever. Not never. Better Nate Than Ever. And what does it do? It focuses on Nate, who is a gay character, although they don't say the word gay. I guess because Florida doesn't allow it, apparently. So they don't say the word gay in this movie, but it talks about him navigating the world as a gay teenager and what that experience is like. Okay, so Disney took in the criticism. Now you have this movie coming out with not only a gay supporting character, but a gay lead. His name is in the title. Better Nate Than Ever. Do you think that's enough for the political left, ladies and gentlemen, who called for this? Do you think it's enough for the fringe group of people who yelled at Disney over this bill in Florida? No. And let's read this article. This is from CBR.com, which happens to be this LGBTQ publication. They say that Better Nate Than Ever is a film directly about a gay teenager finding his place in the world without any character ever once uttering the word gay. This would be the second time in recent history where Disney boasted of having an LGBTQ+ leading character, but the promises of representation fell short from what viewers were expecting. What more representation do you need than a character who is outwardly gay in your film playing the lead? They want you to say the word. They want the children who watch this show to know this is a gay character. He only likes boys, and you need to know that. You don't need to be able to infer it from the content that you're watching and the fact that he basically says it without saying it. It needs to be said. Your children need to know the word gay. It's not enough. So this is why we don't bow to mobs. I don't care if those are conservative mobs or leftist mobs, although they often happen to be leftist ones. Do not bow to them, because the list of demands never ends. And when they're done with this victim group, which is the LGBTQ+ victim group right now, they move on to another one. It's a very famous quote that revolutionaries always need a new enemy. And right now, the enemy is straight people. The enemy was white people. For a moment there, the enemy was men, but now we don't care about women either. Let's just put the transgenders in the sports. And who cares about women anymore? But they move on. And you bob and weave and try to fight all the different enemies that they come up with, and you try to keep up with all the new words and all the new pronouns and all the new ways to identify, and then there's a new one. But let me just make it abundantly clear, because I experienced this myself working for the political left. Nothing that you do will ever be good enough. And if you ask somebody, what would you do today? Ask an organizer, find a local organizer who's knocking doors and talking to you about socialism or LGBTQ stuff, and say, if you snap your fingers tomorrow and all these problems went away, what would you work on next? They'd find a new injustice. there would be something else. The world will never be good enough or suitable enough to be utopic in the view that they have of it. They will always find an injustice, and that's why we can't allow this to happen with Disney, or at least allow it to happen, but don't patronize the business. Don't give them your money. Vote with your wallet here and say, I'm not going to subscribe to a Disney Plus subscription. I'm not going to go on these cruises. I'm not going to foster an environment that is indoctrinating children into what can be unhealthy lifestyles, particularly when we talk about transgenderism with young people, which I imagine is going to be on the agenda for Disney. We just saw that executive say, my kid is trans, and the other one's pansexual. They also brought on other employees during this Reimagine Tomorrow meeting, one who identified as a bisexual aromantic, and asked for more representation for that identity. Come on, guys. Come on. I don't need to really say any more on the subject matter. We're going to move on and really talk about why is this happening? Why would a massive corporation bow down to a fringe group of people who really don't have enough money to represent their interests? And it's a question that I ask myself a lot. It quite literally does not make sense to me. The massive majority of people who patronize Disney are patronizing them to support their values, and when they don't, they will take their money away. Why would Disney risk losing this customer base? And one, because I think these people are very loud and angry, and they will continue to be, and it's just going to cause drama, and it's going to bring it to the forefront, and Disney does not want to be held in that light. I think that's one thing. Two, I think there are people who have managed to infiltrate these upper echelon jobs and gain a massive bit of influence here towards this woke ideology and this woke dogma. I'm going to talk about two people in particular here who happen to be members of the Disney family. You have Abigail Disney, who is a Disney heir. She's the granddaughter of Roy O. Disney. I was looking into the Disney family, just trying to give you guys a view of what this hierarchy looks like. There's like 1,000 Roys in the Disney family. There's Roy E. Disney, Roy O. Disney, Roy P. Disney. There's a bunch. Just a fun fact. There's a lot of Roys in the Disney family, but she's the daughter of one of them, granddaughter. And she responded to Chris Rufo and all of this being exposed and said, like all radical ideologues, the right wing has finally run amok and is coming to devour the hand that feeds it, business. For my part, I am delighted. It is the business world that has been, either by act or omission, feeding the opportunist right wing to distract us with culture war nonsense while they rifle through until they empty everyone's pockets. Now, she goes on in this massive Twitter thread to talk about her view on this whole Disney thing and all of this representation that they're trying to push for. She says Disney has everything it needs to fight this threat, if only it will have the courage to weather the slings and arrows and threats and name-calling. If only leadership will check in with first principles. What are the first principles there that young kids need to know about sex and all the different sexual variations of relationships that they can have and how many genders they can identify as, and that they know themselves better than their parents do? They know their mental health better than their parents do. Is that really a first principle when it comes to Disney? It seems like more and more we are learning that that is becoming a first principle. But again, it's these people who have managed to get massive influence, who represent this fringe ideology and also have power attached to that get to dictate what we learn. We also have Charlie Cora. And here's a picture of Charlie Cora, who's also a member of the Disney family. He's a son of one of the Roys as well, who has now recently been identified as a member of the transgender community. Now, what really gets me and what I start to think about is we're having all these conversations about gender all at once. It's in schools. It's now at Disney. We've seen Nickelodeon come out with a series on transgender kids and highlight that on their network as well. We are seeing it on social media. We are seeing mainstream media outlets like CNN, ABC, owned by Disney, MSNBC, talk about gender theory as well, particularly as it pertains to children. Are we simply having all these conversations right now and all of these things are happening because we're talking about it and because we're aware of it? Or is it part of this coordinated effort to move to this new future? I don't know. And the more I read about it, the more I see other corporations and companies and outlets come out with this stuff, the more I'm thinking that this is a coordinated effort to teach this. And One of the Disney executives in an article talked about how they wanted to see 50% of their characters be representative of the LGBT community. 50%? That is not even a clear representation of the actual US population, let alone any other country. But it is becoming more so. We read something the other day saying that, like 30% of young people now identify as being some part of the LGBTQ community. 30%. It was not 30% 2 years ago. It was not 30% 5 years ago. It was not 30% 10 years ago. But as these conversations become part of the forefront and part of this, quote, culture war that we're going through, more and more children are identifying as it. And when it comes to transgender ideology, which we know is very harmful to children, I read something the other day that said 9.2% of young adults, which was high school to college age, polled on this, identified as not knowing directly what their gender is or having confusion around their gender. So why is this all coming to the forefront now, and what is the agenda around here? Why do we want people to be confused about their gender? Why are we pushing this on children, the most vulnerable and impressionable members of our society? If you have a theory on that, put that in the comments down below, and also comment it after we finish up the show today, because I would love to know. So that is the current controversy around Disney. We saw the Don't Say Gay bill come out. We saw the Disney employees protest. Disney panders and apologizes and parades out their LGBTQ employees and says, we're going to fix this, and then puts out these movies. But this is not all that Disney has done. And a lot of people are seeing it now and saying, I can't believe the corporation has gone woke. Guys, Disney has a history of this. This is not new. So we're going to step outside of the LGBT stuff, set that aside for a little bit. I think I've given you enough evidence to show what's happening there, and you can come to your own conclusion on that. But Disney has also come to the forefront with racial issues, this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion program that all these different institutions are putting forth now, supporting critical race theory and looking back at their old movies to decide whether or not they represent racist stereotypes and discrimination. So if you have a Disney Plus subscription right now, which I imagine a lot of you have canceled in the wake of all of this news, and you go to watch a movie like Mulan or Peter Pan or Aladdin or The Aristocrats. Actually, I don't know if it's on Mulan, but those three others, if you go and look at them, as well as a multitude of other older Disney films, you will find this disclaimer before watching. This program includes negative depictions and or mistreatment of people or cultures. These stereotypes were wrong then and are wrong now. Rather than remove this content, we want to acknowledge its harmful impact, learn from it, and spark conversations to create a more inclusive future ahead. Now, I believe Disney started doing this last year on their content, so we should not be surprised that they've also adopted gender theory in the wake of these discussions. But I'm confused because as a kid watching these movies, there was nothing offensive about it. What's offensive about Aladdin? If anything, Aladdin represents a movie that put cultural representation at the forefront of it. The same thing with Peter Pan. They say, the representation of Indians is offensive in Peter Pan, and the Aristocrats, they had these Siamese cats, I believe, that were represented as evil, and that's a view to make Asians look evil in children cartoons. I can't imagine that children watch that, and they watch the Aristocrats, and they go, well, I hate Asians now. Thank you, Disney, for that, because you represented the characters in this way. It's mind-blowing to me that this is what we focus on. And to me, Disney used to embody family values, values of freedom, values of being true to yourself, but being true to yourself in a way that you wanted to foster your own growth and really identify who you were as an individual with character and morals and merit rather than sexual identity and your race. But now this is what we focus on. So they're on the CRT boat with these things, putting on these disclaimers. We also have Disney leading the forefront when it comes to feminism and animation and children's content. Disney vowed with Frozen, when that movie came out, that they were going to hire more female employees and more female animators. Never mind hiring good ones or people who are skilled or simply looking at resumes and not looking at race or gender. We want the females. That's what we need. This is what helps society. As Ibram X. Kendi would say, we fix past discrimination with present discrimination. This is the future of America. And of course, Frozen comes out as this sort of feminist undertoned movie where women don't need men, and the girl who does fall in love falls in love with an evil man who was using her from the beginning. And it's these sort of subliminal undertones to children's movies that really get them and teach them that this is normal. And you might watch these films and go, well, I don't see anything that is sort of outright indoctrinating. They don't say my body, my choice. They don't say that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, but the themes are there. And what stick with you when you're a child and you watch these films is the themes of them. And what I want to move on from and talk about, because we covered Disney with LGBTQ, we covered Disney with race and diversity, we covered Disney with feminism. Let's do a quick comparison of what Disney looked like when I was a child, when Taylor was a child, when many of you were children, and what Disney looks like now. So Disney has recently put out a film by the name of Turning Red, and it features this character here. Her name is Mei Li. Obviously, this is a 2022 film. She represents the Chinese American experience. For me, when I was a kid, my view of the Chinese experience, at least through animation, was brought to me by Mulan. I'm sure it's a film that you are all familiar with or have seen in some capacity, whether or not you remember it or not. But now we have this movie, Turning Red. So Mulan, her story arc, for those of you who would like to know, was about a young girl who's living in China, and suddenly the country is at war, it's under attack, it's being invaded, and they subscript the men to join the army, and they want to subscript her father, but her father is old, so Mulan pretends to be a man, and she really defies her parents who say, you shouldn't do this, stay home, this is not for you, you are a woman, stick to these traditional routes, let your father go. And she leaves and she joins the army to fight for her country. Mei Li, in this movie Turning Red, the movie starts with this grand sort of dissertation on Chinese Americans and how tradition is so important and how thou must honor their mother and father, and their parents are the beacons of truth that which the child follows throughout their young adulthood and leads them to a fruitful life. And it sort of record scratches, and Mei Li goes, not me, I'm 13, I do what I want, I wear what I want, I am whatever I want, and she proceeds to twerk for the camera. So this movie represents this 13-year-old girl. Of course, it's not being watched by 13-year-old girls. I think we can all identify with that prior, young teenage person in ourselves who was very rebellious, who didn't want to do what mom and dad said, who wanted to dance and was just getting into liking boys. But this movie's not for 13-year-olds. There are 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds watching this movie and being inspired by Mei Li and not Mulan, because again, Mulan needs a disclaimer. That's an inaccurate depiction, and it deploys all these stereotypes of what it means to be Chinese. So this is what kids are watching now, and I've sort of put these comparisons together on this doc. So these are both meant to be about representation in some way, shape, or form, and they are. And again, Mulan defies her parents to serve her country. Mei Li does not do so. She defies her parents to just go and shake her butt for whoever she sees fit and do that whole thing. Mulan, again, is somewhat feminist, although she proves herself, and the movie does highlight that there are distinct differences between men and women. Mulan goes and says, I'm a woman, I have to do this, and I'm just going to learn how to be more manly to do what I need to do. Somewhat feminist narrative and inspiring in that light. Mei Li's feminist narrative is, I don't need mom and dad. I know who I am at 13 years old, and I'm basically an adult, which she does say in the movie in sort of this sly, underhanded joke. And Mulan has no sexual undertones in this movie. Mei Li, however, is a 13-year-old girl, and the reason I'm telling you this is I sort of watched this so that you don't have to. I'm telling you this so that you know what you're up against. Mei Li fantasizes about a 17-year-old boy and draws them kissing and draws them in other, sexual acts that they do not show in the movie themselves. And the mother finds it and is very distraught. Mei Li gets her period in the film and becomes this massive panda. And she shows her panda self to the kids at school. And the kids at school start to somewhat fetishize this panda. They get Mei Li and go, become the panda again. We want to see the panda. We want to see the panda. So this girl starts to do it. And she starts to do this for money. in the movie, the panda is meant to represent sort of the emotions that come along with becoming a young woman and navigating hormones and all of these things. And the kids look at her and pay her to become this panda, and they start making merch for it. And the merch that the mother finds in this movie says fur baby on it. Now, for those of you who are not well versed on what something like fur baby might mean, it represents a sexual kink that I will not get into, but this is shown in the movie. And of course, young kids watching that are not going to understand what that means, but adults sure do, and they can see that. At the end of the movie, the girl is in her human form and she's wearing these sort of furry things, which again represents that group that I will not get into. And when the mom says, you can't wear that to school, Mei Li looks at her mother and goes, "Mom, my panda, my choice." And she saunters off and goes to school without listening to her mother. That's what young people are watching with Disney now. That's what they've chosen to show. And in this brilliant act of defiance and courage, Mei Li and her mother get in this fight in their panda forms. And Mei Li, in this massive act of an F you to mom, starts twerking in a stadium while people watch her and cheer her on. And she goes, "Mom, I love to gyrate," and shakes her butt for the camera. I just can't imagine animators sitting and going, "Yep, perfect for that 6 to 9 year old demographic."
So wholesome.
So wholesome. They're getting so much valuable information from this. I can't wait to see the generation that this type of movie shapes and what they look like when they get into young adulthood. And it shows you. Okay, so out of all that, those examples that I put up, they constitute maybe 5 to 7 minutes of an hour and 45-minute movie. So it's very sly and strategic the way that they place these things throughout the movie, because it's just enough for you to be concerned, but not enough for you to call them out on it and go, look at this movie and look how horrible it is. And I think, again, that's a part of what they do. That's my personal opinion. I think they put in just enough for the light to go on, but not enough for you to have any sort of outrage around it. And I don't think that Disney has been super invested in indoctrinating children as of late, but it seems to me that based on all the evidence that we went through right now, that's their plan. They want to do this in the future, even if it's against their will, even if it's gun to the head, the activists are at my door and I have to say what they want me to say. They're going to start saying that in film form, and those film forms are going to be distributed to you and yours. Now, in the wake of this, let's have the discussion that a lot of people are having. I've seen a bunch of people who are conservative, maybe conservative commentators, maybe on people on Fox News, who have come forth and said, Disney's grooming children. This is grooming children. I've heard the words. I've heard groomer in relation to Disney and just the political left in general. I've heard pedophile in reference to Disney and the left in general. Hopefully we can put this to bed very simply. Groomer and pedophile, very, very big words and very nuanced words that deserve to be used and are only applicable to cases where it is happening with evidence. Just because you see this Disney stuff and you hear people on the political left saying we should talk to kids about different sexual identities and about gender, that does not mean that they are pedophiles. Now, are there instances of people who support these narratives engaging in that sort of disgusting conduct? Absolutely there is. And I actually have a headline here from CNN. Disney theme park employees caught in sex stings and child porn arrests. This was put out by CNN in 2014. It has been an ongoing problem for the corporation for a very long time. As you can imagine, if you were somebody in this camp of lifestyle, being a pedophile and engaging in these disgusting criminal acts, or being a groomer, what better place would you work at than Disney, or being a teacher or something in that vein of career? So that's going to happen. But we need to learn to deviate that from sex of political thought and what people are saying and what people are supporting, because I don't think that a random person on the street who goes, yeah, I think we should mention that people can be gay and people can be straight, and we should let kids know that those two things exist in the same light. I don't think that those people are groomers. So again, there are groomers, there are pedophiles, and I'm sure some of them do work at Disney and some of them support what is happening exactly right here because it does open up a window for them. But let's please reserve those words for cases where we have evidence of it happening and we can actually call those people that, because when we don't, and we throw out these blanket terms like the left are groomers and the left are pedophiles, what have we done to those words? What do they mean anymore? They mean absolutely nothing, and it actually helps the people who are those things because you've thrown it out so much, and then you get the CNNs and the ABCs owned by Disney who come out and say, that's not happening. Look at all this other stuff that we're doing. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. And then when you actually find the cases where it is happening and they are doing this to children, and you go, groomer, pedophile, right here, right here, right here. People go, dude, you said that 2 weeks ago. You blew that dog whistle 2 weeks ago and we didn't see it. It's the same thing that happens with terms like Nazi, racist, fascist, bigot. Do they mean anything to us anymore? Do I care at all when I get called a white supremacist? No. And I think it's because the word is used enough to where it absolutely means nothing. So let's keep our nuance intact because a lot of this is enraging. I watched that Disney movie, and even though a small sliver of it was used for propaganda purposes and indoctrination of young children, I would never ever let my child near that, a mile near that. Wouldn't even let it enter the ear of my child. And it is enraging to see that. But again, let's reserve the big words for the big people doing those things because they become more powerful and you can be far more effective when you use them that way. Now, we're about to conclude here, but all of this is just hilarious to me that anybody is talking about Disney as a company, anybody is upholding Disney as a beacon of truth, of even leftist or woke dogma, when Disney has been completely hush on the CCP. Will you ever see Disney put out anything that has to do with China, their human rights violations, their active use of slave labor within the country? They're tamping down of dissidents. They're shutting down of newspapers that are meant to be able to tell the truth and have actual journalistic integrity for their citizens. No. This is what the CCP does, but it's one of Disney's biggest markets. So is Disney going to say anything? No. In fact, Disney is going to do even worse than that. In their new rendition of Mulan, which was a live-action version of the film, Disney put out a thank you to all the different CCP institutions that helped them in the making of this film, one of whom was the Turpin Security Bureau. Why do we know the name Turpin Security Bureau? And if you don't, I'll tell you why we know this name. Is because the Turpin Security Bureau is pivotal in the areas of China that are engaged in the re-education of Uyghur Muslims. We all know re-education to mean concentration camps, where they are taking the Muslim individuals who live in China, which I believe is about 12 million in population, and putting them into these re-education camps. Now, the CCP says that this is to stave off extremists who want to commit terroristic acts or who want to influence people within China and within their country. But we're hearing stories of genocide, sterilization, human rights abuses, malnourishment with these people. Never mind, our continuance to host the Beijing Olympics and give that favorable coverage. Never mind all of the different people within our leadership in this country who have the CCP, right there in the pocket just in case they need them. We are just essentially little puppets. And meanwhile, while we have all these social issues and Disney takes a strong stance on its support of its LGBTQ employees and will move forward in representing them in their films, we'll still take that money from China, though. Let's not talk about that. In fact, let's blow this coverage of the Don't Say Gay bill and all this stuff as much as we can while I, get these checks from China. So maybe if we yell about it loud enough and we hold enough meetings and we expose enough material, they won't hear the crinkling of the paper going in the pocket, That's exactly what's happening here. So how much can we really trust these people to begin with to tell us anything that has to do with our moral standing, anything that has to do with raising our children? Because should we be raising children to put people in genocidal, concentration camps? No. Should we be raising our children to support slave labor? No. Should we be raising our children to be anti-free speech and to kill, censor, and completely ruin the lives of people who go against the government? No. But Disney seems to support that enough to take in millions, if not billions and billions of dollars from this country. So I think that concludes my analysis on Disney as a company, as a corporation, and everything that they have to say as it pertains to American children and what they should know and what they should be taught. And I want you guys to really look at all the things we went through in this episode. And again, remind yourself of the stronghold that Disney has on the American childhood, because we look at people who have not heard of it and go, you did not have a real childhood if you did not listen to this corporation. Will we continue to do that moving forward? I hope not. I hope children in 20 years from now, when they're adults, are not looking at people and going, you didn't have Disney in your childhood? Oh my gosh, the suffering you must have underwent from your parents to not listen to these stories of trans Asian kids who defy their parents and twerk in front of boy bands that they have sexual lust for. I can't believe your parents deprived you of such a wondrous thing to see with your eyes. And we should evaluate that in every major corporation that has influence in our lives and look to what is it that they support in the background? Because Disney supports the CCP in the background, and every single country that is committing human rights violations that patronizes its business and provides a market for it, but feels it at the utmost importance to tell you how to live your life and what you should be thinking. And if you don't think that, don't patronize the business. And don't patronize the business. I would love if everybody after watching this who has a Disney Plus subscription, Disney products, has a Disney annual pass to the parks, goes on Disney cruises, goes, not only am I not going to do that, but let me write a letter explaining exactly why. And let's see how quickly Bob Chapek hops back on, not with the gun to the head this point, but actually, hedging money and losing, and goes, you know what? In reevaluation, I think Disney's going to move forward and just make normal content again. And maybe we'll take off those race disclaimers, or maybe they won't. But let's allow these corporations who want to function with this woke ideology and this complete and utter garbage dogma to do so in their own solitude, to do so for the people who want that. And hopefully you're educated enough now to not let your kids watch this, unless that's what you want them to learn. And if that's what you want your kids to learn, by all means, go and support Disney. That closes us out. I'm glad we've been able to share this whole woke world with you.
R.I.P. Disney.
R.I.P. Disney. Tomorrow's episode will be coming to you at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Leave a comment down below. What was your favorite Disney movie, and how do you feel about knowing all this stuff about Disney now? What was your reaction to this? And again, I don't think Disney is typically engaged in indoctrination of children. I just think it will be something that they're going to start to implement moving forward. It sounds like that is on their agenda. So let me know how you feel about everything that was said today, what Disney played in terms of a role in your life, and what it was like having this corporation have such a massive part of your life. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe your parents were like, go outside and play. You don't have to watch TV and listen to this stuff. Let me know down below. Tomorrow, I think we're going to be talking about TikTok and social media, because I've been seeing an interesting trend of young girls with a particular affliction known as Tourette syndrome on TikTok. And these girls are making videos and getting millions and millions of likes and supportive comments. Now, these girls claim to be providing education for people, showing what Tourette syndrome is like, but doctors are experiencing an influx of young teenage girls coming to their clinics with Tourette syndrome, and not in this, normal way, in a way that they have very shared symptoms that might be pushed up and glamorized by social media. So is this causing an epidemic of Tourette's among young women, and is social media detrimental to mental health? I think we know that to be a yes, but let's get the actual facts, stats, and the firsthand accounts to hopefully back that up, or maybe prove me wrong. We will see you tomorrow. Please like, subscribe, click the notification bell to be notified every single day when we go live. Again, that is 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, and let's not ever hear from Disney again. Bye, guys.